Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning, and not just a beautiful morning, but I think it's also a beautiful morning for us to discuss what I would say is a more complicated discussion. And when you hear it, you're going to say, well, Rabbi, you always make sure this has something to do with us. What does this have to do with me? And so I'm hoping that you'll follow me through this process and that we'll be able to learn something new together. So this week's Torah portion is the portion of Tazria. It's the 13th chapter of Leviticus. And in this chapter, it discusses the laws of an unusual illness called tsarat. Some people translate tsarat as leprosy, but it's not leprosy. It's some unusual illness that existed during that time. It's identified by a white patch appearing on the skin of a person with the hair inside of it turning white. It was symptomatic, according to the Torah, of an internal moral and spiritual blemish. And it deemed the person temporarily impure, tameh, impure, according to the Torah. We can talk about that at a different time, what that actually means. But for the sake, the Torah says, for the sake of this condition, the person is required to separate from the community and undergo an intense program of introspection and healing. Today, I want to focus on one particular verse in this. Hold on a second. I wanted to share. Let's see if I can share this. It's not letting me. Okay, it's not letting me share it. Sorry. So I wanted to focus on one particular verse. And I'll read the verse to you in English. The Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of his flesh. If hair in the affliction has turned white, and the affliction's appearance is deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a tsarat infliction. The Kohen shall look at him and make him impure. So maybe here's the chat. I will bring this into the chat because I want you to take a look at this um, and see if you see the issue that I'm going to have with it. I'll say it again. The Kohen shall look at this infliction, and I know this is not my usual, but as we say in Yiddish, halt cup, which literally means hold your head. Listen for a few minutes, and I think that there's going to be a beautiful lesson in this. The Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of his flesh. If hair in the affliction has turned white, and the affliction's appearance is deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a tsarat infliction. The Kohen shall look at him and make him impure. So, let's give you a little background. The Torah here is saying that a Kohen, a priest, a descendant of Aaron the high priest, was authorized to diagnose a tsarat and to pronounce the malady as such. And even in a case where all the symptoms of the illness are clearly present and a multitude of scholars recognize this as tsarat, the person cannot be diagnosed as possessing this malady unless the Kohen says this is what happened. But there's a blatant, strange redundancy in the verse that I just told you. Can you see it? Again, the verse says, the Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of the flesh, and then the Kohen shall look at it and make him impure. Now, we know the Torah is exact. Every word is exact. 306,805 letters, every letter is exact. Why repeat a phrase? And you're going to find this throughout the commentaries. It's one of the great ways that we study Torah, is we try to find particular phrases and ask ourselves, why does this have to be repeated? The Torah should have said, the Kohen shall look. The Torah should have said that the Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of his flesh and make him impure. Why does it say, again, the Kohen shall look at it? One of the great rabbis of the last generation offered a magnificent explanation. Still trying to bring it up here. Okay, I guess it's. I'm gonna stop trying. The rabbi said, as it turns out, that the origins of what we call today holistic medicine or the integrated approach, they're actually in the Torah. This rabbi was Rabbi Meir Simcha HaKohen of Dvinsk. He lived from 1843 to 1926. And he's the author of a Torah commentary called Meshech Chochma. And he was one of the most prominent sages and leaders in Eastern Europe in the early 20th century. And what's fascinating, just to give you an idea, he himself was a Kohen. And so I think this insight is even more personal. So he says that by repeating this verse, the Torah is teaching a profound law, a profound lesson. There are two distinct evaluations that have to be made. The first time the Torah says, the Kohen shall look at the affliction on the skin of his flesh. And the second time the Torah says, the Kohen shall look at him and make him impure. And Rabbi Meir says there are two separate evaluations. One is on the disease, and the other is on the person. Look at the affliction, and then look at the person. First, the Kohen has to look at the affliction and see if it's the one that technically meets the definition of tzarat. Then he has to examine the symptoms and determine the proper diagnosis based on the nature of this disease. So what is he looking at? Is the affliction. But that's not enough. The Kohen must now look at something else. He has to look at the person. The verse says, and the Kohen shall look at him to see if it's appropriate to declare this person impure. The symptoms may be present, but the person may not be in a state where you can declare them pure or impure. So the Torah says to the Kohen, we want you to evaluate two independent factors. Number one, is this blemish tzarat? Number two, whether at this time it is appropriate to turn this person into a person who has tzarat called emetzora. And unless both factors are present, the Kohen is not able to declare this person impure. I'm going to take it one step further because Rabbi Meir Simcha, he quotes an interesting Talmudic law in his commentary. He says the following: if the tzarat person, if the person who has the tzarat, who came to the Kohen, if they're a newlywed, they're given 7 days of feasting, the Sheva Brachot, before declaring them impure. And the same applies on a festival, which means if a fresh groom or bride develops the symptoms of tzarat, the Kohen will not examine them and declare them impure, even if all the symptoms are blatantly present. The Kohen will not examine them until after a full week passes since the wedding. And the same is true for the 7 days of Passover, for the 7 days of Sukkot, in order simply to avoid spoiling the wedding celebration or spoiling the joy of the festival. The Kohen, think about this. The Kohen has the license to, to delay proclaiming a person a Metzorah, even though the Kohen knows full and well that the skin condition the person has qualifies as Tzarat. How can the rabbis come up with such a novel law? If the Torah says that someone has Tzarat and needs a certain treatment, would you delay a treatment? It's like delaying a medical treatment because the patient's in the middle of holidays. Don't worry, it's not an emergency. I won't go to the ER. I have to finish 7 days of Passover. What, you don't want to aggravate them? If this is a real condition, it has to be taken care of. What, I don't think medicine would operate well if we were waiting for everyone to find it convenient to take care of an emergency. You're not doing the person a favor. So why would the rabbis come up with this novel law to delay the entire process of the examination and the diagnosis? So the sages in the Talmud derive this law from the verse, and on that day it will be seen. Why is the day mentioned here? Sounds like the Haggadah, right? The verse could have said, and when it will be seen. The words on that day come to teach us that there are days when the Kohen will not look at the leprosy. I shouldn't call it leprosy for the tzarat. It's not the proper translation for it. The Kohen has to look if it is the right time to declare the person impure. Or do we have to wait for another time? And so from this, the Talmud deduced that certain times are off limits. Certain times are off limits for examining symptoms of tzarat. And they reasoned which days would be considered off limits. This is as far as times are concerned. But this commentary, the Meshech Chochma, brilliantly argues that the meaning behind the redundancy in this verse is even more powerful. Sometimes a person is not ready for the verdict. They're not ready to hear it. They're not ready to hear the news. And the Torah says the Kohen should not only look at the symptoms, but the Kohen should also look at the person. Not only examine the malady, but also peer into the human being. The person may have a disease, but if the person is not ready to become impure, then they should not be deemed impure. I think this is a novel idea in the Meshech Chochma. The Kohen has the right to ignore the symptoms for any reason that makes the Kohen feel that it's wrong to declare the person impure. For example, if the person with the symptoms must be in the company of people, to quarantine this person outside of the community would be dangerous. It would be counterproductive. Then this person is not in a state where they can be seen and diagnosed as impure. What I think is interesting is that this approach, which is articulated over 3,000 years ago in the Torah, is actually reflected in contemporary medicine. Today, there are two approaches to medicine. The decision as to which model to use for diagnosis and for treatment of a patient revolves around the following questions. Does the physician treat with the goal of letting go the person's symptoms, or do they treat with the goal of putting the entire patient in balance, treating the person, not just the disease, with the goal of stopping pain or discomfort and to eliminate symptoms? What the doctor needs to do is consider the fastest and the least complicated, least expensive, and most effective therapy, and the approach with the fewest side effects. And should the goal be to promote overall balance and well-being, the doctor needs to choose a treatment, a protocol that best addresses the patient's patterns and differential diagnosis, the constitution, the history, the imbalances in the patient's biochemistry, biomechanics, bioelectricity, as well as non-physical considerations, the emotional, the physical, the psychological, the spiritual state. And the Torah here is intimating to us that a healer's approach should not only be to focus to get rid of symptoms, but rather to look at treating the whole person. Because if not, the whole person will not get well. Either there will be some other new condition, or the condition originally treated will return. And so, what the Torah is advocating here is for a holistic, for a whole person approach, appreciating all the facets of a person's life and seeing how all aspects of our lives are integrated, rather than just to suppress local symptoms, to look at an entire person. Now, what does it mean for me and you? Most of us here are not doctors. Most of us here are not Kohanim. And most of us here don't really understand what I just said for the past 20 minutes. Maybe myself included. But what's the message? The message, I think, is the following. How do we judge ourselves, and how do we judge others? Before I can pronounce a person as impure, I need to see the person, not only the problem. Do I know how to recognize the difference between evil and trauma? Between evil and trauma. Do I know how to recognize the difference between selfishness and fear? Between being bad or being wounded? Right before I became a rabbi, I asked one of my teachers, I said, give me one piece of advice that I should take with me as I become a rabbi. And he looks at me and he says, don't ever answer a question. Always answer the person. It doesn't work in today's world because everyone just goes to ChatGPT or to Google to answer questions. And so it's all, our worlds become one size fits all. But really, the human to human connection, asking a human a question, is because the human can answer the person, not the question. He said, a person may come to you and ask you, why did my mother die young? You may be wise and say, because she had a weak heart. And maybe, he told me, you answered the question, but you didn't answer the person. The person wasn't asking the rabbi a medical question. The person was asking the rabbi an emotional question. He's in pain. He misses his mother. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot and the Ethics of Our Fathers tells us to give every person the benefit of the doubt. But I would say a more precise translation is that one should judge the whole person as meritorious. Hevidan es kol ha'adam l'kav zchut. You should judge the whole person as meritorious. Before you judge someone, you need to look at the factors making up the person. You need to look at kol ha'adam, the entire human being. Before you give a diagnosis, never judge someone without knowing the whole story, without knowing the whole person. You may think you understand, but you don't. There are also two types of therapists. There are therapists who fit each patient into a pre-existing mode, and there are those who will tune into the unique persona, the unique struggles of the patient. They don't fit them into their boxes. What they do is they employ models that will borrow from diverse models to help accommodate the person that they're treating. So, your friend, your child, your student, parent, someone may be behaving in a way you don't like. Maybe they said hurtful things to you. At that moment, you're tempted to look at them and say, "You are impure. Get out of my home. Get out of my life." A term that people use today, "You're dead to me." Technically, at that moment, you may be correct. This person has all the symptoms. The behaviors are ill-conceived. The behaviors are obnoxious. But the Torah says, wait. Wait. You must not only look at the actual behavior, at the actual words coming out of his or her mouth, but also at the entire human being. Evaluate the entire story. In life, don't try to suppress the symptoms. Try to understand the person. That is our goal. Don't try to suppress the symptoms. Understand who is in front of you. Who is this person? Will calling this child impure, will calling this child contaminated, tarnished, really help them? Is that going to help your relationship? Is that what they need? Does this really serve their interests or even your interests? Will it help them rehabilitate themselves? Is it possible that there's a deep pain within this child's heart and they're incapable of articulating it? And that alone is causing them a deep anguish, a deep anger? Maybe this is a time that the person needs more of you, not less of you. The person needs more empathy, not less. It's precisely at this moment that the person needs much more than they can even articulate. There's a beautiful man. He lived not long ago. His name was Rabbi Aryeh Levin. They called him the Tzaddik of Jerusalem. That's what they called him. There's some beautiful stories about him. Probably one of the most famous stories about him is he once went to the doctor with his wife, and he turned to the doctor on behalf of his wife and said, "Our leg is hurting." And the doctor said, "Yours or hers?" And he said, "Ours." It's a story you probably heard, not realizing this is who it is. So he was once walking in the street in Jerusalem, and he saw a former student of his. And that student had, uh, for lack of better words, had abandoned the way of life that he grew up in. And he's walking towards. When the student noticed that he was walking directly towards this former teacher, he decided to cross the street to avoid him. Rabbi Aryeh runs after him, already an older man. And he says to him with a smile, "I'm so happy to see you, but why did you avoid me?" So the student says, "I'll be perfectly honest. I'm embarrassed to see you because I don't have a kippah on my head." So Reb Aryeh looks at him and says, "My dear student, don't you realize that I'm a short man? I can only see up to your heart." There are two types of educators. There are two types of teachers. Some just see the rules and the deviations of the rules. But there are others who can peer into the heart and see a soul. I know I promised you 30 minutes today, but I like to just tell you one last story to try to articulate this idea. In 1963, Professor Velvel Green was a rising star at the University of Minnesota. He was a pioneer in the field of, I think it's called bacteriology. And he was invited by NASA to study the effects of space travel on human life. The young scientist was visiting and lecturing at dozens of universities across America each year. 1963 was also the year that this professor met Rabbi Moshe Feller, a man who I know quite well, who's the Chabad rabbi in St. Paul. And up to that point, the Greens, like many American Jews of their generation, gave little credence to their Jewish heritage. Observances like Shabbat, like Kashrut, like Tefillin, he would say it's old-fashioned, primitive. But this young rabbi, Rabbi Feller, in him, Professor Green saw a vibrant and fulfilling outlook and lifestyle, one which could fill a deep void in his successful yet rootless life. The interesting story, the origin story of these two is Rabbi Feller had tried to make a meeting with him for quite a while. I heard this from Rabbi Feller himself. And he finally was waiting in the waiting room to meet him. But he realized that if he goes into the meeting, he's not going to be able to pray the afternoon prayer, the mincha prayer. And so he decided to pray. And they came to him in the middle of the prayer and said, the professor will see you now. And he was in the middle of doing the Amida, and he gave them his finger to to wait for him. And the professor came out and he couldn't believe that this great guy, he works for NASA, he's one of the great scientists of the generation, that this man is sitting when he's waiting for an appointment for him. God is more important. He said it just was mind blowing to him. It's just the origin story. So they develop a relationship, and at Rabbi Feller's suggestion, Professor Green writes to the Rebbe about this void and his interest in Judaism. And the Rebbe's warm and engaging reply was not long in coming. The two developed a steady correspondence, and this young scientist was soon taken by the Rebbe's phenomenal mind and his passion, his devotion. And there's a beautiful correspondence, many letters between the Rebbe and this Professor Green over a number of years. And with each letter, Professor Green found himself further encouraged along in his spiritual journey and his commitment to Judaism. He soon made his kitchen kosher, and they began to observe Shabbat. One day, Professor Green came across a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a scientist concerning the Torah's account of creation, of the universe, and the rejection of the theory of evolution. Now, when he saw this, as a scientist, he pens this no-holds-barred critique. And he says, because I greatly respected the Rebbe, I dropped the forgiving tone that scientists often use with laymen, addressing the Rebbe as if he were a colleague whose ideas I rejected. I bluntly said that the Rebbe was wrong, specifying what I saw as faulty and unscientific. And he says, I concluded my letter by saying that the Rebbe had best stick to his field of expertise, to Torah, and leave the science to scientists. The rabbi shouldn't deal with these with science. But in the Rebbe's next letter, the Rebbe resumed where it had originally begun, in Green's spiritual quest and his Jewish identity. Of the evolution issue, the Rebbe says not a word. So the professor assumed that the Rebbe was conceding in matters of empirical fact, and the Torah must differ to scientific reason. And with this, he considered the matter closed. Professor Green's progress towards Torah true Judaism over the next year and a half, he continued this correspondence with the Rebbe. He became fully Sabbath observant, observing many mitzvot. He was even deciding to make aliyah to Israel. He ended up moving to Beersheba. And each time the Rebbe would respond with words of encouragement. Even on one occasion, the Rebbe sent him a pair of tefillin. And then one day came the letter where the Greens told the Rebbe that they decided to place their children in a yeshiva to receive the best Jewish education that they could. And the Rebbe's reply was warm and encouraging, as befitting a turning point in their lives. And then at the end of the letter, the Rebbe says, by the way, concerning what you wrote me regarding the Torah's account in creation, and proceeded to refute point by point Professor Green's objections to the Rebbe's unscientific treatment of the subject. And you're probably wondering, concludes the Rebbe, why I waited this long to respond to your remarks on this matter. And the Rebbe finishes the letter with what I believe is the most important message that I can teach you today. The Rebbe says, but my job in life is not to win arguments. My job is to bring Jews closer to the Torah and its mitzvot. What the Rebbe was saying to him is, had I sent you that letter, then it would have been, I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong, he said, she said. Our job in life is not to win arguments, it's to win friends. It's to help people. Somehow in our society, more than ever, it's become about what I think. It's become my ideas. Life's too short to be around people I don't agree with. I hear it all the time now. I don't know when it happened, but it's quite recent that it's become a phenomenon. That we live our lives based on ideals and ideas, not based on humanity. And so if there's one lesson that I can leave you from this week's Torah portion, it's not our job to win arguments. It's not our job to fight ideals and ideas. It's our job to love and to accept, to look at a whole person, to look at who is the person in front of us, and to love that person for who they are. We don't have to agree with them. It doesn't even matter. And with that, Hashem should bless each and every one of us, that we should be able to live in a world that is unified, because that's what we need more than anything. Unfortunately, social media is exasperated division. What are the videos that go viral? The videos of people that are divided, that are fighting, that are arguing. That's not our place. That's the wrong message. We have to be unifiers. We have to unite. And I think now more than ever, during this time of the year, during this moment in time, it is our opportunity to to unite. Yesterday, somebody verbally attacked me with a statement. And I turned to them and I said, "Thank you, but I see you for who you are. And I'm not going to argue with you." They said, "Oh, see, because you're wrong." I said, "Maybe, maybe not. But that's not the point of this conversation." I think we have to disarm. That's our job. We have to stop feeding into the rhetoric, stop becoming that tribal rhetoric, and see how can we unite, how can we build. And with that, Hashem will see that we're truly united, and Hashem will end all of the suffering and bring true peace to this world, and how much we need it so much, how much we need our hostages back, how we need peace right now more than ever. And Hashem should see that and be able to grant that. Shabbat Shalom.